I'm Peggy Gregory. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Central Lancashire in computing. And
I'm Lucy Hunt. I'm second year PhD student at Lancaster University and I'm part of the Values and Computing research team. And we're here to present a bit about values, and we're actually going to do a little SPA exercise as participation. Yeah. We've got a little 20 minutes.
We're going to make you do something. We're not going to talk for a whole hour. I'm sort of the warm-up act for this because most of this is Lucy's PhD research, but I've also been working in and around values for many years in computing, which is why I'm doing this with Lucy. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background to some of the ideas that we're going to talk about and start thinking about the sort of technology that I'm sure you're all involved in developing, and that is being developed at the moment. So we've got some fantastic positive technology developments going on. Smart cities, smart homes, sort of health tech. There's some fantastic things going on. But there are challenges with it as well. There are both strengths in the new sort of technology that we're developing, but there are also weaknesses. And one of the things that we wonder is whether some of the developers, some of the development teams that are working on this new technology, are they actually thinking about some of the potential impacts of the technology that they're developing? Are they thinking about some of the unintended consequences of what they're doing? And as part of that, I mean, obviously, every team will think about value. We all think about business value. We'll be thinking about efficiency, safety, security. But are we thinking about wider values as well? Are we thinking about social good? Are we thinking about our environmental responsibilities? So there are a whole range of values that we might need to think about while we're developing these amazing and exciting things that we're involved in doing. So this is our starting point, this values in computing statement. This is just part of a longer statement that is what is called, is another manifesto. It's not the Agile Manifesto this time, it's called the Denver Manifesto. It was written and signed at CHI 2017. So those of you who don't know CHI is the biggest international human-computer interaction conference in the world. About nearly 4,000 people attend this conference, and in 2017 there was a workshop on values at which this manifesto was sort of written and signed. And the main point about it is this idea that everyone who's involved in developing tech makes decisions. We're all involved in making decisions about what is worth pursuing and what is potentially harmful. But we might not be doing that very consciously. And part of the point of thinking about this and talking about this is to make it higher up in our consciousness, as it were. Tech is just embedded now in our lives, in our societies, and values are actually embedded in technology. Whether we're aware of it or whether we're not aware of it, values do get embedded in technology. So the best thing to do is to be more conscious, have more conversations about the ways that we are embedding values in our technology, and whether we're doing the right thing or whether we're comfortable with what we're doing. Going on from there, what are values? I've used a few sort of good and ought words, but actually values are wider than that. Values are quite wide. So we might think about ethical values like good and honesty and social good, environmental awareness, that sort of value. But there are other values that we might have as well, about wealth or ambition, prestige, image for our company. All these are values as well. So values aren't just necessarily about ethics. Values encompass a whole range of things that we do, and often they are comparative. It's whether we value one thing over another thing. So we do have values, we do use them to guide our choices and our actions, but we're often not maybe very aware of what we do. This is a really interesting, this Dot Everyone survey. It was a really interesting survey. I don't know whether have any of you heard of Dot Everyone? It's a think tank that has been set up by Martha Lane Fox, who was originally had set up the Last Minute company in the dot-com era, and is now Chancellor of the Open University and is a peer in the House of Lords, so very influential in terms of technology in the UK. This think tank have recently are also interested in this issue about values and technology, and recently done a survey, and from this survey they found that nearly a third of tech workers have actually seen in their organisations decisions made about technology that they believed could have negative consequences, either for individuals or for society as a whole. So that's actually a lot of people. That's a lot of people, and they're aware enough of it to kind of answer, to tick that box in a survey. So that's quite a significant amount of people. And some of those, only 18%, but nevertheless, nearly a fifth, actually went on to leave those companies as a result of that. So people are actually taking action about certain things. And obviously that's going to be the far end of the scale. That will be actions that people feel are somehow unacceptable. But as I was saying, there's far more about values than just stuff that's really harmful or really on the other side really good. There's a whole raft of values sort of in between. Another bit of background, which is really important to mention, is the media stories. And this, for people who are not working in tech, this is often the way they initially come across this sort of issue, by reading media stories and thinking, oh my goodness, that's happened in that company. What else is going to come from the technology that we're developing? So the Volkswagen story is a really interesting story of basically a cover-up. So Volkswagen, as I'm sure most of you know, they actually put technology in their cars that was only switched on when they were doing emissions tests, and were then switched off when the cars were just being used normally, as a result of which the cars were actually giving much greater emissions into the environment than everyone initially thought. So they didn't admit to this until some researchers actually published the results of tests on real cars. And eventually the story did come out about what they were doing. So there was a lot then of analysis of what had gone wrong, and it was clearly it wasn't just one person, it wasn't just the bosses. A lot of people didn't know about what was going on. One engineer in the States was actually imprisoned for his part in this, because it was very clear that he had been involved and made the wrong decisions and had been involved in this deliberate deception. And there's been a lot of fallout for Volkswagen as well. So these stories are actually quite interesting, and it's interesting reading these stories. I don't know whether you've thought about this, but what would happen if that was me? What would I do if I was in that company and I was being pressurised pressurised to do something like this, which is deliberate deception. So it's something that's worth thinking about. These big stories are actually really good ways for us to frame our thinking about what might happen in an organisation and how we might be pressurised to do things without maybe having the right conversations about them. And there are other examples here as well. So there's the Tesla breach, which was an insider threat, sort of a malicious insider. So that's a different thing. The Cambridge Analytica, which was a whistleblower. So that's someone who was involved and then decided this has gone too far and actually became a whistleblower. Interesting stories from Google and Facebook where employees themselves actually get together and make public statements. So there are more, certainly a group of people who feel sufficiently strongly about something to make a statement about their values and say, what the company is doing is not in alignment with what we feel is the right way to go forward. And then, the WannaCry, Marcus Hutchins, an interesting case there of someone who was a hacker and actually then used his knowledge to do something, to warn everyone and to find the fix for the WannaCry problem. But then later on, he still was sent to court for his previous hacking offences. So there's some interesting stories there about values and how they shift maybe over time. Okay, right, I'm just going to hand over to Lucy.
Okay, so behind all these stories there are software engineers, and we need to think about what their behaviours were and what they were doing. We've got a survey, another survey. Stack Overflow did a survey in 2018, and one of their and in 2018 they asked, what would developers do if asked to write code for unethical purposes? About 60% said we wouldn't. 5% said, yep, we will, and we've seen examples where people have, and you've got the sort of more dark hacker culture. But then we've got 36% that says depends. But depends on what? Why would you write an ethical code? I have experiences where I've worked thinking, I wish I could do something to disrupt this. This is annoying me. Why am I doing it? What might other people do? Could it be for money? Could it be for status? When we look at VW, they knew they were cheating. They chose to cheat rather than to build a product that didn't produce emissions. What was driving that? Was that reputation? So we're going to get you to do an exercise now. So we want you to think about the unintended consequences of a system. VW, majority of their people wouldn't have wanted that project to fail. They weren't looking to go down the deception route, but it happened for a number of reasons. So what we're going to do with you now, it's called consequence planning. We would normally run this in a big workshop, that would be 2 or 3 hours, and this will be one of the exercises, but we want to get you thinking creatively about how your project, how your product could go wrong. So your project vision is you're going to be working for a company that does self-driving cars, UK-wide and available to all. You've got a platform, a website and mobile apps. Your vision is to disrupt car ownership, and you want safer and less congested roads. But to think about the unintended consequences, what if you're too successful? What if you grow too fast? What might happen? Who might gain? Who might lose from your project being a success or a failure? What technical vulnerabilities might there be? Think about your role and what you know about. Who could take advantage of those vulnerabilities and why? What malicious, negligent or accidental uses could there be? And then this is the exercise we're going to get you to do. We want to see what your evil twin might look like. So you've got your product, like the VW car, everybody thinks it's happy and good, but underneath the covers, what's going on? So evil twin looks the same, behaves badly. So we're putting out a list of things in your groups of 2 or 3. Pick a role, either your role or a role in this project, and think about what evil it could do, what under the cover it could do, or what it might openly do, and see how far you can stretch those consequences. Marcus Hutchins, when he started writing malware code or fixing the WannaCry issue, had no idea he was going to end up arrested by the FBI when he came out of DEF CON in America. These unintended consequences. Can you think of a story and what the headline might be associated with that story?
And if you're sitting on your own, you might want to go and sit with someone else and so that you can have a discussion about it, because these things are quite good. Yeah.
Is 5% enough to do damage? If there's 5% of a group that are prepared to code unethically, is that sufficient?
If you don't know they're doing it, I mean, if you've got people trying to hide their behaviour, well, I come on to the next section. We've got a discussion about evil on projects, but what sabotage, what underhand things might happen on projects. And then you look at what practices you might put in place to try and... Unintended consequences, asking people to present about their work.
So, yeah, that's good. So the idea was that some hitherto unknown political movement decides to hack the control software of this fleet of autonomous vehicles, cause disruption for demo publicity purpose. As a result, the roads are gridlocked in the city, and the young one can't get to hospital and dies on the way.
Serious, I believe. So who was driving that? What role was? Who was the nefarious state in that?
Well, the idea was that the political movement was thinking of causing a major effect by disrupting the transport system, which they hadn't thought of unintended consequences.
So it's a double unintended, isn't it? Some of the unintended car, unintended disrupt.
We didn't aim a person to be in the car.
Anyone else want to volunteer there?
Story?
Which was your story, but it was sort of, it's very easy to me to think on the nefarious ways of doing it, sort of by increasing fare costs and taxes to being able to use them as a mobile device for kidnapping and terrorist incidents.
Lots of bad ideas.
Lots of bad ideas.
Can I get them off you later? For
So it can be used for tracking people. It will obviously, if you can't track the person or their phone, you can track the car that they're using.
We're talking about perhaps deliberately training AIs on bad sets of data, biased data. We had an idea about artificial inflation of insurance claims. Hacking it, like developers putting in backdoors into software so that they personally are never charged for things. Also, I had an idea of like if a company was a national thing, how about taking out the entire network of the country becomes dependent on self-driving cars, and then you hack it in such a way that the whole thing becomes dysfunctional and doesn't work.
It's like e-cash.
Any more?
It's kind of worrying how quickly and
Creativity.
easily
Yeah.
people come up with these ideas.
Imagine if we gave you a whole day to do this.
And there were some good ideas.
So we decided to get out of the ice cream business and deliver our drugs using robo-taxis. Doing some hacks either by putting it always in a particular location or having it locked away in the glove compartment. And that might even not need hacking, so we were wondering if it actually needs hacking. The only thing there is you have to spoof a load of accounts to not be who you are. We did have, we wanted to know whether or not there was actually forking in the individual's car was going on, because YouTube is reliable as Wikipedia. But if an individual has a particular problem, say a batch of solenoids don't work on a particular window, is it tempting for a company to fix it over the air, and they've forked that piece of software for that group of 2,000 people who were unfortunate to buy that particular model of car, which is completely, could be anywhere on the globe, rather than call them in to replace these faulty devices. So if they fix it that way and it's forked, if they've got a regime...
Stop.
Shout louder.
Shout louder. If there's a regime where forking is a normal part of business, then how would you keep track of all that? And then what happens when the next version of software comes out? Contract killing, because all these cars have got cameras on there, so basically you take them over and say, these faces need eliminating. Cross-border traffic, if I wanted to move something from one place to another across an international or national border, So yes, it didn't take as long.
No, it didn't, did it?
Should we have one more and then we'll...
Yeah, anyone else? Ideas?
No.
No? Okay, right. Thank you very much.
So in case I didn't get much sharing, but we've got plenty, I run this workshop with students. I ran, these are the Dr. Evils they came up with. Crypto mining, so they make money while you're sat in traffic. Dynamic pricing, I mean we get them with Uber anyway, so that could be manipulated. Blocking taxi spaces so that you have to use their vehicles. Data theft, sell your data. Be difficult to leave. Hack your competitors, exploit the travellers and botnets. And I came up with some headline adverts, stories. We make money while you sit in traffic. Drink and drive, yes you can. We destroy the competition, you're going to hack or crash. We follow you everywhere. And at Christmas, we know if you've been naughty or nice. So exploiting where travellers go, working out what they can do. Kidnapping, I hadn't had that one before, so that's going to go on my list.
Yeah, we thought about it.
So we've talked about the big news stories. We've got you to create some stories. So our next set of slides is taking you through personal stories. So what's your team story? What's your organisation story? What project-to-project stories go on? We like talking and we like creating stories, as you've all done already. My particular interest is the dark side of software engineering, so looking at sabotage, lying on projects, what goes on to make projects fail, but things that happen that we have to cope with. And so that's what we've got here. These are different examples. One I'd like, life of code story is one I quite like. So vulnerabilities. If you've got vulnerabilities in code, there's any one of them, there's many ways it can be explored and the life that goes on from it. It could be, you can find a vulnerability and you can sell it to the black market where an exploit might be discovered or created and criminals can use it. You can sell it on the white market. You've got Apple and Google and Microsoft offering you money if you find vulnerabilities in their system. You'll get even more money if you've got exploits that can take advantage of those vulnerabilities. Or you can just publish it and let's see what happens. Actually, what's important in that part of the story is who discovers it. If you remember the WannaCry and the Eternal Blue vulnerability in Windows, the NSA in America knew about that for 5 years, but they chose not to tell Microsoft about it. They kept it, they created an exploit, and from that they created spy tools. They were using it to hack into other people's systems. Unfortunately, they got hacked, and that vulnerability went into the dark market, and that's only that exploit. At that point, the NSA had to tell Microsoft. Microsoft have to issue patches for, I mean, it was in the Windows systems. There are many versions, even the unsupported ones. So Microsoft very rapidly had to come up with patches for both supported and unsupported products. And as Peggy mentioned before, Marcus Hutchins found the vulnerability, found the off switch for the WannaCry, but as a result of that, he also got arrested by the FBI for work that he'd done previously. So that whole chain of consequences from that one vulnerability in a Windows system is quite interesting, but also looking at what could have happened. What if they'd gone straight to Microsoft? Because ransomware is I'm calling it an epidemic at the moment. Every day there's another news story about how it's been abused. It's also one of the key hacker toolkit tools as well, because it's such an easy thing to use and get into systems.
So now we were going to just briefly tell you our own stories. So my story is that I was in IT, is that I started off not in IT, and then I taught myself way back when in the it was probably in the late 80s. I taught myself to code. And then I started working in a small publishing company just as everything was starting to move over towards using digital publishing. And they said, oh, we want someone who's going to kind of take on and get interested in the IT in the company. And I was already interested in it, so I took on that role. And I ended up kind of managing their small IT team. And from there, I thought, right, I want to know more about this. So I did a master's, I became a lecturer, I did a PhD, and now I'm back. So now I do a lot of research, and my research is now into software practices in businesses really. So I feel like I've come full circle by first by being sort of lured into the academic world, but then once I was in the academic world, becoming interested again in how people are practicing and what their practices are. Most of my research, as Kevin knows, is on agile transformation and agile methods use by practitioners. So I'm a co-founder of the Agile Research Network, and I work with lots of academics and businesses all over the world. And I think there are some really interesting connections between this question about value and what is valuable and the agile world, and the way that the transparency and collaboration and participation and continuous learning are part of the agile world, but are also really interesting ways for people to talk about their values and to allow values to become maybe more present and visible in projects. So I think there's really interesting connections there.
And then briefly, my story as well. So I started coding at age 9 or 10 with a Video Genie, if anyone worked on one of those. BBC Micro at school, ZX Spectrum at home. That was 1991. I did engineering at university and information systems, and then I went on to be a software engineer for about 10 years. And an IT consultant, travelling all over the country, being very unhappy with life and thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. So I went to Kathmandu for 2 years as an IT volunteer, felt good, much more in line with my values and things. I came back, went back into work as a consultant, but didn't enjoy it, again being constrained, told what to do, working on projects I wasn't very happy on, so I went freelance. And since then I'm feeling much happier. I choose the projects I work on, and really feel if I'm not happy I can leave. I'm at the .everyone research about if you're unhappy, you see a decision you don't like. To have that opportunity to be able to move on is quite powerful, and how you feel at work. And then about 5 years ago I started studying with the Open University, which culminated in me doing a master's at Lancaster, cybersecurity masters. Really interested in cyber threats, how organisations behave, looking at software engineering teams, but also culture as well. And I'm now doing a PhD in computer science, software engineering specifically, looking at values in computing. And the sort of joining up my story, I learned to code on the BBC Micro. I taught Hour of Code at the National Museum of Computing, so we get kids coming in and we would teach them on the BBC Micros. This is only like 5 years ago. They're asking, where's the internet? Where's the mouse? You don't have that? It's green. And now I do Code Club at school, so I feel like I've gone like the complete circle. I taught myself, do it at the museum, and now I run Code Clubs at school. Back to the studies. So how can we systematically study values? We use sociology framework, the Schwartz Human Values Model. There are 10 sort of headline system statements, and under them there are sort of more smaller ones. So under universalism we've got equality, social justice. Under power we've got wealth, authority, public image. You might think about VW in this case. They were very concerned about power and reputation, less so about environment, protecting society. We study values at 3 levels. So we've got this system level 1. We take them down a level and ask you, what does this mean to you? What's your personal interpretation of these values? And we also look at how you instantiate those values. If you say, I'm environmentally concerned, what do you do? What practices do you do? If you say you care about your teammates, do you write clean code? Do you document your code? Do you fully test it? Do you communicate in teams? Those sorts of practices, how do they translate down into actual actions? You might look at Donald Trump, who says freedom to him means building a wall. Mark Zuckerberg says freedom for everybody on Facebook, you can publish the lies, that's okay. But what are the impacts or the unintended consequences of those values? So how do we study them with engineers? If you look at these, you think, universalism, how can I apply that to my software engineering practice? It's not straightforward. So what we've done, we've taken the ACM Code of Conduct, it maybe could have been the BCS, and we've taken those principles and we've coded them into statements that are relevant to software engineers. So in this principle, public good is a central concern, is one of the principles of the ACM Code of Conduct. So we've got a statement around that. The software we build is good for the professional computing work we do. And we have 19 statements. So it's important I develop software robustly and securely. It's important that my work is valued. We turn values into statements that software engineers can understand. And then we get people to do a Q-sort on them. So all of those statements, none of them are unimportant. We're not saying any of them are good or bad. It's just how you prioritise them. So do you prioritise the respect of your work over the security that you build into the product? Do you want to be an honest and trustworthy colleague, or do you want to enjoy the software process or not annoy people? There's different priorities you can apply. So we sit down with software engineers and we give them these 19 statements and we ask them to sort them onto a grid. Left-hand side, least important. Right-hand side, most important. And as they are placing them, or as you are placing them, we have conversations so we can record qualitative data as well as the quantitative data saying which value in which place. From this, we can then do factor analysis. We've got the grids, we can look across a number of participants to see if there's any common factors coming out. And one of the archetypes we find is a socially concerned software engineer who significantly, it's more important to have public good rather than worrying about the quality of their workplace or having their work respected. They're concerned environmentally, but they don't need their name in the paper about it. But there are other software engineers as well. You've got your autonomous risk takers. You've got fun-loving people that do care what people think. We're not saying everyone fits into a bucket, but these are some of the archetypes that we find when we're doing our studies. But values change over time. I mean, I know through the life of my career, when I first started out, it was about getting on the job ladder, getting on the market, getting on the housing markets. It was all about money and learning the ropes. As I've gone on, I've become much less bothered about the money and much more concerned about doing good. So this is why I've gone back to university. I hope to be teaching once I finish my PhD. We, as I might have said to some of you who are going round, we run the evil twin exercise in a bigger workshop. And what we do, before we run the values Q-sort, we ask the group to pitch their project idea to someone like Tesla or Uber or Ford or the government. So you get a values model of what they perceive that company would want. We then get them to do the values Q-sort and they say what's important. So for this team, before we went evil, they said team cohesion and having fun wasn't as important as producing a good quality product. Is one of Peggy's routes, actually. Then they did the go evil, and then they did the Q-sort again. They were quite dismissive of we don't really care about the environment we're working as long as we produce a product, everyone's happy. But afterwards, when they went through all the evils, they were more concerned about being paid well, about being treated kindly, and having code reviews. So they got quality of system, because we were talking about hacking and how people could do nefarious things, but also look after your staff, which was just, I mean, whether that's a long-term impact, I don't know, but just within the space of that 3 hours, they were quite a different group before and after the session. Wrap up. We've told some stories, we've created some stories, and looked at some possible consequences, and we've looked at how you can do values reflections in your team. You could look at these statements, how you rank them, look to see what individual priorities are, maybe look to see what your team priorities are, and maybe compare them to your organisational priorities. You might find I'm very driven about doing good, but at some point I have to make money, so you have to let some of your priorities down to fall in line. But at what point do you switch over and leave because it's not appropriate, or find ways to change things, like you talk about your governance issues, and how do you encourage change in your organisation? Opportunities, if you're interested in this sort of research, and also any that Peggy's doing, we always want volunteers to get involved and come and do studies. We can come to you, or you can come to us at Lancaster. And I should say, rather than the ACM, I suppose I should have that. An afterthought. But that's our presentation. If there's any questions.
So I really like the exercise. Have you seen behavioural changes of people's attitudes during the exercise? So someone might start off a bit arrogant or.
If
or
we can,
standoffish.
we should still use the mic so
Sorry.
things get recorded as well.
This one,
Sorry. Yeah,
Yeah,
the only one.
yeah. Is this on? It's in red.
No, if it says on here,
Oh,
it's on and it doesn't say mute, it's on.
Sorry.
Um, Have you seen any behavioural changes happen during the exercise you just presented?
We definitely get the aha moments. And when I've run this at Peggy's, but we didn't do it in the the company profile. When I've done it at Lancaster, when people realise the different value, what values Uber might have over what values the government might have when they're doing good, but then also when they are more malicious, it has got them thinking about other ways. I mean, these are software engineering students, they're working on projects, we're trying to get them to reflect on their projects. I haven't marked assignments to see at the end whether that's worked out in practice, but you definitely get an energy, well, as you did, you get the energy in the room when people start to think evil, but then also thinking how could you take advantage of, what can you learn from those malicious or evil aspects, and how can you make your product better by thinking about those.
Yeah, I think all these activities, the conversations and the activities are really powerful when you engage with people to do them, because I think sometimes value conversations can be a bit abstract and high level. If you actually start talking about real projects, it's the same with the Q-sort. I think the Q-sort is a very powerful thing to do in a team as well, because you really have a conversation about what to put on is what is most important and what is least important, and then you can have a really interesting conversation with your team. It sort of brings, as I say, it surfaces some of these issues that are there anyway, but we're not really having conversations about them. So I think, some of the actual techniques are really powerful.
And the values aren't bad or good, they're all important, it's just what you prioritise. And for someone to say, I have attention to detail, but other people they just want to run off and be hedonistic and create things quickly. And it's just, if you look in your team, it's okay for us to both have different priorities, but then we've got to look at the team as a whole, and the business we work in, the product we're creating, the culture of the organisation, and how do we fit in, and looking at the tensions that might cause, and what counterproductive workplace behaviours is the sort of the long name for it. But what does that mean? What happens as a result of tensions as people feel them? Do they turn to sabotage? Are they looking for work? Are they disinterested? Are they distracted? Are they misreporting on projects? Are they lying? There's all these other consequences of not feeling comfortable with where your company is going, what the values are, and where you fit into it.
One more question. I know the example that you ran through is about software engineers. This should be able to apply to any multidisciplinary team with WebOps, UX, project managers.
So these statements are for software engineers, but you could create the values and then turn them into principles for UX, for
Just a team.
for a team generally. I mean, we say software engineers, it could be software engineering teams, which includes a whole range of specialisms, and we're just going to be lumping it in for this case.
Can I steal that?
You can work with us, come and use it. I've got 2 sets of cards with me, you can have a set of them if you want. They are good.
Can people hear me? That's good.
Oh, yeah,
The
sorry.
reading line is working. Brilliant. So we technically can use 5 extra minutes, so it's at our discretion. I've got one question for you two. Now you two are not the typical academics. You don't have a huge amount of your career invested in being known for how many papers you produce each year. But I have come across those kind of academics as well. And now this is a kind of real life story, more or less what I'm saying. It's not from either of your universities, and it's not from your kind of academics. It's very different breed of academics I'm talking about. So I have a strong background in physical sciences and technologies, where I tend to be called the expert or the professional. But then I also have a scientific background, and I like to do lay work in other fields like clinical sciences and social sciences. And it is related to one of those roles that I have been involved in. And I have come across a situation where there are research leaders who are pretty much just that. I'm not sure they are especially good teachers, but they have a very large portfolio of research papers, hundreds and hundreds of them. And they are, in a way, they also have a role in how the research framework works, the research excellence framework, and they know all the top people where they need to know. And they have been extremely resistant to have lay involvement unless it is mandated in law. So in clinical sciences, it is beginning to happen a little bit, but not as much as I would like. And they are extremely against lay people having anything to do with governance. The simple way that they think is, what's in it for me if I let you be on my governing body, for example? And nothing. You are not especially well connected in my field. You are not well known to the research councils. You are not well known to the higher education funding body. So why do I involve you in my research? And in turn, the way their mind works, they are not especially well organized. They care about their overseas junkets, going to conferences to New Zealand and whatever. And they don't want any of that to change. And I'm not saying they're always evil, I wouldn't go that far. But doing good is not their top priority. Career progression, very often in a very narrow manner, is their top priority. And this is what is happening in what I might call your field, the wider research and higher education field.
Yeah.
So have you got any bright ideas? Is anything good that people should know about that's happening in your sector that can stop or...
I mean, that's a really tough question. So you're talking about, well spotted, the academic world is cutthroat and as competitive as any other business, really, isn't it? And people, it is. Have you looked at, I haven't looked at the research world, I have to say, because my focus is on practice.
Well, I'm so proud. My PhD is focusing on inspiring the next generation. How do we help educate the software engineers coming through university with practices that help them be the better, more rounded, more thoughtful software engineers? These sort of statements, the value statements, and getting them to think about those in practice. We run Software Studio and we get them to do value studies during their projects. I know examples of what you're talking about, but I'm absolutely about getting into practice and doing things with practitioners. Coming to conferences like this and finding people to work with is far more important than numbers of names on papers.
And I don't know, manifestos and white hatting and that sort of thing, how far is it going to work, again in your field specifically? But have you even thought about that kind of thought leadership where people will need to adhere by certain code? You already have the code related to what good research looks like, but going one step beyond and doing public good in everything that you do.
I mean, there's already, the think tank, Everyone are talking about responsible technology policies. I went to parliamentary training research last week to look how we can inform policymakers, how we can scrutinise government and initiatives that they're taking. What our research does is looking at something systematically. That's what we have to do. We look for empirical evidence of impact. So having studies like these values and where you can measure things. I mean, the challenge is how do you measure something before, during and after a session like this? Does it have any long-term impact? One of the things I look at is how we use stories, how we tell stories, and how we use that as a learning tool, what you can take from the media stories, your personal stories, anecdotes, horror tales, near misses, all that kind of thing that helps feed back into practice. We don't want to be the next VW. We don't want to be the next NHS with the WannaCry issue. It's like how can we learn from those stories? And also find good stories as well. It's not, the Google's a good example of like the employers being able to say, actually, can we talk about this in public? And make a change. And giving, what as a software engineer, what is your responsibility? The fact that there was a VW engineer jailed and the judge was saying you can't blame your elders, you can't say it's management told me to do it. It's like how can we help and empower? It's partly the governance thing as well. How do you look at the risks and the unintended consequences, and how can you speak up about them, making that an open process? And I'd say from certainly the work we do, we're not driven by papers, it's driven by practice and what we can give back to practice.